นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังคุณุตรังอุปัชฌายังนะมาสามิ To begin with, I'd like to make a general point that I like to divide the religions of the world into two main families. The family of religions that grew up in the Middle East, most prominently, of course, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And we refer to those religions often as the great faiths, and they are religions which consider faith to be their defining feature, and we can refer to them as belief systems. And it's common for people in Western cultures to assume that all religions are belief systems, and so Buddhists are often asked, "Oh, you're a Buddhist, what do you believe in?" Assuming that Buddhism is a belief system. In fact, I would argue that Buddhism is not a belief system. I would characterize Buddhism as an education system. And it's the Pali word that you may be familiar with is sikha, which means training or education. So the Buddhist teachings are concerned with a comprehensive education of how we live our lives as human beings. So one doubt may arise, well, do we have to have faith? Does faith play a role? Does belief have a part to play in our spiritual life as Buddhists? Well, the answer would certainly be yes, but let us consider what the main pillars of faith are in the Buddha Dhamma. And the central faith that we have is in the enlightenment of the Buddha. We can't, I don't think any of us could claim to be able to prove that the Buddha was actually enlightened 2,500 more years ago under the Bodhi tree in India. But we take it on faith, we take it on trust, and we have to take it on trust. But let's notice that there are certain implications that are apparent when we take that on trust. And what does it mean really in our daily lives? Well, in Theravada Buddhism, we place great stress on the point that the Buddha was born as a human being. And so we may say that the Bodhisattva, or Prince Siddhartha, was enlightened as a human being, or we may say as a representative of the human race, and through his enlightenment he proved the capacity of the human being for enlightenment. And he did make it very clear subsequently that that capacity was shared by both men and women. So our faith in the enlightenment of the Buddha implies a faith in the capacity for human beings, whether men or women, from Asia, from Europe, or from whatever part of the world, to realize enlightenment. And from that it follows that we have faith in our own capacity for enlightenment, because every one of us here, I'm assuming, are human beings. So from a faith in something that happened 2,500 and more years ago, we are brought right to the present, to here and now, and our faith in our own capacity for enlightenment. And that is absolutely essential for any true progress on the path. Now the teachings of the Buddha, as we chanted just now, lead onwards, lean inwards. So you can see, if you have a belief, or your fundamental belief as a Buddhist is in your capacity for enlightenment, then if you have any sincerity, you must of course put it to the test. If you believe that you can do something, and you should do something, and it's the most important thing that you could possibly do with your life, then how can you not try to do it? So the realization of enlightenment may seem a very far off and perhaps intimidating goal or aspiration, but if we look at the causal process that leads to the experience of enlightenment, we can express it very simply as we have the faith, we have the belief that we can abandon all that is unwholesome. We have the faith that we have within us the inherent capacity to develop all that is wholesome and noble. We have the faith that we can purify our minds. So that faith is put to the test. It has to lead on to effort. And that's a measure of the integrity of our faith, the authenticity of our faith, to the extent to which we are willing to apply ourselves to this education, which requires abandonment of the unwholesome, development of the wholesome, and purification of the mind. Now, right from the beginning, we can also use our rational minds to support and encourage ourselves. For instance, I think every one of us can look back on our lives at some time in the past when we were prey to some particular bad habit, whether it could be alcohol, drugs, or some particular abusive kind of behavior, or whatever, and subsequently, for one reason or another, we were able to abandon that particular bad habit. Now, even if that bad habit might be something quite mundane, quite insignificant in the large picture of things, the fact that we were able to recognize a particular habit, a particular kind of behavior as unwholesome and abandon it, proves that we have a capacity within us to abandon the unwholesome. Similarly, if we compare our lives these days with some years ago, I'm sure every one of us can notice some small or perhaps large improvement. We can see certain good qualities within ourselves that were not there some years ago. And from that we can conclude, yes, we have the capacity to develop what is wholesome and noble. So we can extrapolate from some very simple, very basic perhaps quite minor details of our past history to strengthen and fortify this faith in our capacity for enlightenment. So the Buddha's teaching is that there is no original sin, there is no bad habit, there is no evil quality deep within us that is fixed, unalterable, and which we cannot abandon if we apply the Eightfold Path. Similarly, there is no good quality, noble quality that we've seen, looked up to, revered in our spiritual teachers, which we are incapable of developing within ourselves. So this is the faith that provides the foundation for our spiritual practice. In the teaching of the spiritual powers, faith is the first of the 5 spiritual powers. The second is energy, or virya as it's referred to in Pali, which can be translated as heroic effort. It's not just ordinary effort, it's the effort of the hero or the heroine. So we become spiritual heroes, spiritual heroines, based on a sense of faith, the power of faith. And as effort is for the unenlightened human being a wavering, unstable factor, we use our intelligence to find ways to stabilize it. One way is to look at its foundation in faith. So if you go through a period of feeling quite stale or unenthusiastic for practice, and we don't believe in that and identify with it, but we see it as a mental state which is conditioned by a weakness or a lack of faith. So it's not that faith is something fixed. It's like you've got faith in the bank. Yes, I have faith in the Buddha's teachings. I'm a Buddhist. But faith is something that waxes and wanes. And the waxing and waning of faith affects our interest in practice and our ability and our perseverance in our spiritual practice. Many years ago, I was on a long solitary retreat. This retreat lasted a year, and of course during the course of that year my enthusiasm for practice waxed and waned. And I remember one particular period in which I was feeling very low, lacking in energy. I just didn't have that kind of enthusiasm for practice. And this is quite common for people who are living alone. If you're in a community, as all of you practicing together, then practice perhaps doesn't reach the heights that it can do when you're by yourself, but also it never dips so low because of the support of your friends and the encouragement from your teachers. But I was in that period of having to be my own refuge and find my own skillful means to deal with the problems that arose in my practice. And I realized, I reflected on the nature of enthusiasm, perseverance, interest, energy, traced it to faith. And so I put on my robe, I lit a candle, because it was pitch black in this cave that I was living in, and bowed 3 times to the Buddha. Then I bowed 3 times to Ajahn Chah, and then I bowed 3 times to Venerable Sariputta, and 3 times to Venerable Mahamoggallana, 3 times to Venerable Ananda, 3 times to Venerable Anuruddha, and I bowed 3 times to all the great arahants of the Buddha's time. And then I just kept bowing to all the great monks I could think of, right from the time of the Buddha to the present day. And after I've been bowing for about 30 minutes, all this great joy and enthusiasm for practice arose. And it was a real breakthrough for me to see that the if you're feeling really low in practice and lacking, it's just one more conditioned state, and you can use your wisdom faculty, you can use your intelligence to give rise to the faith that will bring back that lost enthusiasm. So this is one point of encouragement. There's always something you can do in meditation. You can always find some way ahead. There's no real dead ends. There are a series of challenges which can become more and more subtle as you follow the path. It's not, some things become easier and some things become more difficult. But if our main interest is in the quest for liberation, then the challenges are not experienced as dispiriting, quite the opposite. So faith provides the power for the impetus to our practice. But in the overall education on which we are embarked, we have to apply ourselves to 4 different areas of our life. And the word that the Buddha used for these different areas or spheres of development, the Buddha referred to as different kinds of bhavana. Now this word bhavana is very interesting because it is the word most commonly rendered in English as meditation. And this is, I feel, one of the reasons for the very narrow and reductionist presentations of Buddhist teachings which have flourished, unfortunately, particularly in the West. This idea of something called meditation, which requires you to sit in a particular way or walk up and down in a particular way, whereas the Buddha spoke of bhavana as cultivation, education, and requires us to apply effort to, firstly in the external world, our relationship to the physical universe, and secondly to the social universe in which we live. Then in the inner world, the sphere of emotion, thought, or what in present day terminology sometimes referred to as EQ, and then wisdom development, the education of our wisdom faculty, which is the summit, the highest kind of development. And wisdom indeed is perhaps the defining or characteristic virtue in Buddhism as opposed to faith in the Middle Eastern family of religions. But it's very important, I think, to remind ourselves that this is an integrated development and that you can't apply yourself just to one area and neglect the others. You won't be very successful. So if you're not applying yourself intelligently and wisely in your relationship to the physical and social environment in which you live, your success in developing mindfulness on an object, developing concentration or vipassana, whatever you want to call it, will be ultimately frustrating. Some people who lead rather unwholesome lives, unskillful lives, are, it's true, capable of developing states of concentration and to develop quite good samadhi. But firstly, that samadhi will not be sustainable for any length of time, and most importantly, it won't be sama samadhi. And by that I mean the samadhi that will lead on to liberating wisdom. So that is a very important point, that in Buddhism it's not just developing the concentration which leads to a reduction of stress and an inner feeling of well-being, but that most importantly it's creating the conditions in which the wisdom faculty can clearly penetrate the nature of the five khandhas, the nature of our existence. And it's for that kind of samadhi that the attention and care must be applied to the way we live in the world. Buddhism, the term Buddhism, is only probably a couple of 100 years old, and the Buddha himself referred to his teachings either as the brahmacharya, the holy life, or more commonly the Dhamma Vinaya. So it's interesting, isn't it, that people talk about practicing Dhamma, but few people talk about practicing Dhamma Vinaya. But the Buddha is very clear that the education, the Buddhist education that leads to liberation, must include both the inner and the outer practice. And the word he gave from the outer practice is the Vinaya. Now most of you will probably have heard of that name as referring to the monk's discipline, but it's not restricted to that use. And the Vinaya is a word that refers to creating the external situation, the external conditions most conducive to the practice of Dhamma. So all the monks' rules, or most of the monks' rules, have that as a major objective, creating situation in the monasteries or in monastic communities which are most conducive to the realization of Dhamma. And of course in a monastic community you can do that to a far greater degree than you can in lay life, but in lay life the same principle applies. So in Buddhism we have the five precepts as basic framework for life in the world, and although the things which we seek to refrain from are similar in some ways to the elements of the moral codes of other religions, there are certain unique characteristics. In Buddhism we don't believe that there is a deity who lays down laws or commandments and who rewards those who keep them or punishes those that don't. But we consider that there are certain ways of living together in the world which promote the environment most conducive for the abandonment of the unwholesome, development of the wholesome, and purification of the mind. And that as human beings we are intelligent enough and capable enough of recognizing those conditions and adopting them. So as regards the first precept, for instance, as Buddhists, we say, look, if we live together in a way in which we don't feel safe, in which we're constantly paranoid or fearful that someone is going to kill us or hit us or beat us or abuse us, then it's very difficult for us to develop spiritually. A sense of safety, security and trust is essential for the higher spiritual practices to come to fruition. So, as community, let us refrain from acting and speaking aggressively, from hurting each other. So, on the level of morality, we take it that we make use of this very special, this wonderful ability we have to refrain from things which we recognize as harmful to ourselves and others. I don't think that animals, for instance, can do that. Animals are very much prey to their instincts, and that you can train a dog to sit and run and get a bone and do things like that. Cats are much harder, and certainly I don't think that you could train a cat, even if you could speak cat language, not to chase after mice, because it's their instinct. As a human being, we can recognize that we have instinctive desires, drives, things that give us pleasure in the moment, but we have this ability, don't we, to stand back from that and say, in the long-term implications, repercussions on ourselves and others are such that I won't do that. I'll just refrain. So we can protect ourselves from all kinds of bad karma, and we can protect those around us, and we can help to create the kind of conditions necessary for spiritual growth through making use of this fundamental capacity to refrain. Now notice when lay Buddhists request the precepts from monks, that very act is a reminder that the precepts are taken on voluntarily. Monks don't tell lay people to keep the precepts and try to cajole them into keeping them, but the lay people, the lay person who is going to take on the 5 precepts, asks for the precepts, requests the precepts, and the monk gives the 5 training rules. So you don't consider these as commandments from the Buddha or even as commandments from your spiritual teacher, but you say, I take on the training rule to refrain from taking life. I take on the training rule to refrain from taking what's not given. So the moral code is one expressed in terms of a training or an education. So you say, I'm going to educate my conduct as a human being by not killing, not harming. Now, in the practice of sila, the sila bhavana, you see. Now we couldn't translate that as sila meditation, could we? But it is sila bhavana. And to take this example of the first precept, let's say you're living in a country like Thailand and a mosquito bites. Now the instinctive reaction to that is just to swat the mosquito. But if you take on a precept voluntarily and reflect on it and its value and its importance to you, to the extent that it's right there, let's say almost like say in the front drawer of your mind, right there, then at the moment that you're about to swat the mosquito, you remember, oh, it's against my precept, and you stop. And that's a really important and interesting phenomena there, because you have used the mindfulness of a precept to create a wedge between volition and action. The Buddha said that karma is volition, sila is volition. So in Buddhism, morality is function of volition. So how can you be aware of your volition? It's so quick. Everything happens so quickly. You use the mindfulness of precepts as a tool to illuminate volition. You illuminate the unwholesome volitions which lead to breaking the 5 precepts, and you see volition as volition. You don't act on the volition, and you just see it. And so the mind which lacks those precepts as pegs for mindfulness lacks choice. It's a very conditioned, blind, automatic pilot kind of mind, isn't it? You get some kind of stimulus through eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, you react. And usually after the reaction you can think, I shouldn't have done that, or that, oh dear. But how is it that you can be right there and mindful in the moment? Mindfulness is not some kind of abstract state, just be mindful. You have to be mindful of something. So in daily life, one of the things that you use as the pegs for your mindfulness are the precepts. So you're mindful of your precept. And when you're mindful of a precept, then you can choose. You're about to do something, you're about to swat the mosquito, you're mindful of your precept, you stop and you look and you say, what am I doing? Do I really want to do this? Is it wholesome? Is it unwholesome? Is it in line with my aspirations, my goals, or not? All these kinds of questions and intelligent reflection becomes possible because you've used mindfulness of a precept as a tool. So here, the relationship between daily life and meditation, something that's a constant question for so many of us, starts to become a little bit clearer, I think. What are you doing when you're sitting on your cushion? You're being mindful, using mindfulness as a tool, but you're being mindful of your breath, or mindful of a word, mindful of a concept, mindful of a body. You're using mindfulness and you're seeking to sustain mindfulness on a particular object. And if you maintain mindfulness on a particular object, after a while you realize a stream of mindfulness. Ajahn Chah's simile is of water dripping from a tap. Begin with your drip, drip, drip. You apply effort, you persevere, and the drips become more frequent. Drip, 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 drip. And hopefully after a while becomes a stream of mindfulness. Now when mindfulness becomes an uninterrupted stream, we call it samadhi, or concentration. Samadhi is an unbroken stream of mindfulness. So samadhi is not something you do. Samadhi is the result. What you do is you do mindfulness. Now when you're sitting, you can develop a very refined kind of mindfulness, because you're cutting down all external stimulation, closing your eyes, and you're concentrating on one thing. You're being mindful of one thing. You're sustaining mindfulness on your breath, your in-breath and your out-breath. In daily life, then it's not so easy. You can't go into a meeting and be mindful of your breath. You have to say something, you have to respond to other people's words. If you're just sitting there watching your breath going in and out, you're probably going to get the sack. So you may be quite calm about it, but it's but in the long run probably not the wisest approach. So the question is, the practitioner says, in this situation, what are my responsibilities? What do I want to do here? What's the best way to deal with the problem in hand or the challenge in hand? And what should I be mindful of? Where should I place my mindfulness? So when you're alone and you're working, some kinds of work require you to think. So you have to be. You can be mindful of the thinking process. When you're doing something which is more mechanical, you can be mindful of the movement of the body. When you're in a meeting, what can you be mindful of? You're mindful of your speech, mindful of the feelings and perceptions that arise as other people speak. You speak, and people say, "Wow, that's great, that's really profound, that's wonderful." You praise. How does that feel? People say a load of rubbish. How does that feel? People ignore you. How does that feel? People say things that you don't agree with, and you want to say something. How does that feel? So you're able to be mindful of something. There's always a Dhamma practice that's possible in any situation. In some circumstances, it might be a question of developing patience. But the Buddha said that patient endurance is the supreme incinerator of defilement. So if you're in a situation where you're called upon to be patient, you're practicing the Dhamma. You're educating yourself. You're doing the work. It's certainly not true that you can watch your breath in every situation, or to do one particular Dhamma practice and apply that in every situation. But you can be mindful, and you can apply different Dhamma teachings at different times. So the external practice is one of using mindfulness of precepts as your main tool. Also, the other external area that I mentioned is the education of our relationship to the physical world, and that begins with our physical body. So that means applying our intelligence, wise reflection to our physical bodies, how much we work, how much we rest, how much we sleep, what we eat, how we eat, all these, how much we exercise. So if we were to call those things meditation, then it doesn't sound like meditation. But in terms of the Buddhist education, then you can't separate wise attitude to eating and exercise from meditation and vipassana. It's all one spectrum. It's all connected. It's all just one thing, and one thing will affect the other. So this is, I think, very important to recognize. From the physical body, we go outwards, and what's our relationship to all the things that we call ours, or me, or my possessions? What's your relationship to my house, my car, my DVD, my this, my that? What's your relationship to money? This is part of spiritual life, because it may not sound so inspiring as reflecting on emptiness and liberation. But if you haven't got your relationship to the material possessions that you consider, at least conventionally yours, worked out, you're not going to get very far. So this is an area of Buddhist cultivation, relationship with the physical world, and from there we go on to the environment, the physical environment. So to recap, in the external world, you have these two areas: relationship to the physical world, beginning with physical body, going on to the things we call ours, and going on to the world that we live in, and then on the social world, using precepts to guide us, and there's pegs for mindfulness, to create situations in family, workplace, communities, in which we feel that the conditions are supporting that which is good and wholesome, and not supporting that which drags us down. But of course, taking on precepts and seeking to refrain from certain ways of action and speech are not removing the causes, and we can make resolution. Today, no matter how angry I get with that person at work, I'm not going to express it physically or verbally. So we're taking the middle path between repression and expression, merely being aware of the feelings that arise, but not creating karma through body and speech. But if we were to make a resolution not to get angry with that person the whole day, today, bow to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha, today may the virtues of the Triple Gem help me not to get angry with so-and-so. Then we get very frustrated and start to feel a lot of discouragement and self-aversion, that we're hopeless, because we're trying to use willpower or the power of refraining in the wrong area. It can't go that far. So in the case of anger, for instance, the area of emotional or the development, education of the heart, we seek to develop certain opposing mental states. Most important, as I say, is mindfulness. Why? Because the more you can be mindful of your body, your feelings, the mental states, and so on, the more sensitive you are to what's going on, the more wisely you can act. So before you get fully angry with someone, there are plenty of indications. Just as before rain falls, we know that if the sky goes very dark and the wind whips up, that these are indications it's likely to rain very soon. Similarly, before you get really angry with someone, there is tension in the physical body and various changes taking place. And if you're more tuned into that, then you can recognize that and prevent it from going any further. Also, you use the power of metta and developing the opposing power to power of anger and aversion, and you undermine the power of anger, power of metta. But with the mindfulness, if we're applying mindfulness in the formal meditation posture, then we start to develop a sense of calm and inner stability, and the mind becomes much more refined. And only when the mind becomes very calm and peaceful and clear and bright, that we really begin to have an understanding of what this word defilement means. In Buddhist circles we use this word a lot. In other traditions they sometimes use the word afflictions, and there's various translations of this word kilesa. Most commonly we use defilement. But whether you use a Pali word, a Sanskrit word, an English word, if you haven't really developed that samadhi, then you don't know what it means experientially. I would give perhaps a simile here. Let's say someone was born in an inner city slum and had lived in this slum from the day where they were born, and never been anywhere else, and didn't have a TV where they could compare their life with the life of anybody else. And because that's all that person knows, then it would be normal, and there would be no sense of the dirt, the unsanitary conditions, or the general squalor, because there's nothing to compare it to. Now let's say this person has one day is taken out of the slum, out of the city, and high up into a mountain for the first time in his or her life, breathes fresh air, out and sees trees and mountain ranges and sky, and suddenly realizes, where I live, it's just such a miserable place. It's such an awful, dirty, dingy place. And that recognition of the awfulness of the place that one has lived all one's life only comes about clearly and as a real experience rather than an idea through the penetration of that state which transcends it. And so only when we have experienced that very clear, very calm, very bright and very energetic, blissful state of mind, that we really have that new perspective on defilements. And certainly the coarser defilements like anger, even if we experience them, then our relationship to them has changed, and now we feel very coarse, almost unbearably coarse, and the mind seeks to go beyond that anger, experiences anger, but experiences anger now as defiling to the mind, because the mind has had a glimpse, at least a glimpse, of the undefiled state. So this is why the Buddha said that when the mind is very, very bright and peaceful and alert, clear in meditation, it has, as it were, a glimpse of Nibbana. It has a glimpse and an inkling of the liberated state, and it has a new perspective on the unliberated state. So there's an awful lot of discussion and disagreement even in Buddhist circles on various technical aspects of meditation and samatha and vipassana and all these terms which probably many of you have heard of. But in actual practice, I would say these distinctions don't really appear so in such a clear-cut way. So you say, if your mind becomes very peaceful and calm on an object, what's that? Well, people say that's samatha, that's concentration. But when you come out of that concentrated state and you have a new perspective on your normal, confused and defiled state of mind, and your attitude to that changes through that new perspective, well, what's that? And you could say that that's insight, but it's not through reflecting on the three characteristics as such, but it's come through an experience which transcends one's normal experience and enables one to look at it in a different way. So the development, the inner education, is one in which, in certain phases of the practice, the stilling and calming and brightening and energizing and clarifying of the mind is the major focus but that's not to say that the wisdom faculty is not working in the background. Similarly, when the wisdom faculty becomes more prominent, that is not to say that the stilling, calming, brightening aspect of the mind is absent. These two are always working together. It's merely that one aspect, the penetrating, the looking, is more prominent than the stopping, the stilling of the mind, and in other phases, vice versa. The mind, when it is very still, very calm, and very bright, is one which is intensely mindful. And the Buddha said that equanimity purifies mindfulness. So it's not that when you're some people talk about getting attached to peaceful states of mind. It's important to observe that when the mind is really peaceful, really calm, really bright, it's not possible for attachment to arise in that state of mind. It's when the mind withdraws from that state of mind and you desire to return to that state of mind and just to dwell in that very pleasant abiding, that attachment arises. So the peaceful mind of samadhi is not a mind that forms attachment, but it's when the mind withdraws from that the attachment arises. So the value of the clarification and stabilizing aspects of meditation is that it provides a foundation in which the habitual movement towards pleasant sensation and movement away from unpleasant sensation is anesthetized for a while, or in the sense that the mind just doesn't want to do that. Without samadhi, you can't help yourself. The moment that there is pleasant sensation in the mind just inclines towards it. It can be very, very subtle, but it happens. This is something that you can observe. And similarly, when there is unpleasant vedana in the mind, feeling in the mind just withdraws from it. And the mind that can develop insight is the mind which is free of that habitual movement towards and movement away. And in Buddhism, as you know, we talk about suffering a lot, and penetration of suffering, comprehension of suffering. But the paradox, if you like, is that only the happy mind can understand suffering. A suffering mind doesn't know what's suffering. The suffering mind identifies with suffering. I am suffering. But as long as you think I am suffering, then you don't understand the First Noble Truth, because there's still an I am in there. The happy mind is one which is brave, courageous, fearless. So this is the importance of the citta bhavana, the development, the education of the heart, in that it's providing that sense of self-confidence, fearlessness, well-being, which enables us to look into the emptiness of all our ideas of who we are. If you lack that, then what often happens is you start investigating impermanence or dukkha or selflessness, and you get to a certain point and it's as if you reach the edge of a cliff and suddenly the mind is out of the peaceful state, and this very deep-seated fear is a major obstacle, and it's the calming, the brightening, the stabilizing meditation which enables one to transcend that. So it's not that most of us don't understand the three characteristics or haven't read books about it, but the point is to create the emotional maturity and stability which enables us to go beyond the words and the concepts through to the reality. In the end, the wisdom faculty is that which liberates us. And so gradually throughout our daily lives, whether it's in the meditation hall or outside of the meditation hall, keep inclining the mind towards these perceptions of impermanence, perception of imperfection, perception of selflessness. So you develop an acquaintance with them, and your ability to reflect on them in a normal as a part of your daily life means that when the mind does become calm, its ability to develop that in a non-verbal level will be much enhanced, because you've done the donkey work already in daily life. And Ajahn Chah, my teacher, would recommend this as a daily practice, to use this sense of, he would say, not sure, or not always so, or things are, in other words, impermanent, and keeping up that perception of impermanence and the lack of any guarantee. And the in Thailand, the most of the village people who come to the monastery have chanting as their major formal practice, and they chant the translated chants and the Pali chants translated into Thai. And so every day people are chanting, I am of the nature to age, have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken, I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die, I have not gone beyond dying. I will be separated from all that I love and cherish. So if you take that on as a daily reflection, morning and evening, then you become more and more friends with, at peace with change in life. You don't consider it anything unusual. You say, how, I never dreamt that could possibly happen. You know, it's just so unexpected, because you're constantly reflecting on how things change. And Ajahn Chah would give very simple examples. He said, you know, your favorite food, the food that you love the most, if you only had that food and you had to eat that food 3 times a day and nothing else, how long before your favorite food became your least favorite food? The taste of the food would be exactly the same, but your feelings towards it would change. So noticing that unstable, uncertain, fickle nature of mind, and how simply, how easily like changes into dislike, dislike into like, love into hate, and so on and so forth. And this is a very important part of our practice. So looking, and the clearer your mind is, the more mindful you are, the more you're able to look, the more you're able to see, and the more interesting it becomes. So looking, observing, learning, educating oneself. So formal practice, developing concentration through mindfulness, sustaining mindfulness. And when you're mindful of an object, what happens? Your mind wanders. Some people get discouraged, but I would encourage you to look on mindfulness like a muscle. If your mind wanders and you bring it back, your mind wanders and you bring it back. Now, that's not a waste of time by any means. I would compare it to working out in a gym where you have, say, a repetitive exercise. Let's say you're using your arm in this way. Then the muscles responsible for that movement, constantly exercised, will grow and become strong. Similarly, your mindfulness muscle, by constantly being exercised, to bringing the mind back to the object, renouncing, giving up, letting go of one's interest and enjoyment of the distraction, and bringing the mind back to the present moment, is developing this mindfulness muscle. Now, outside of the meditation sittings, you begin to notice, and you should make a point of trying to observe this, that when you get lost in some thought, emotion, aversion, view, you notice, you realize more quickly than you did before, and your ability to re-establish attention on your present task, the task in hand, is much enhanced. And if you begin to see that in your daily life, your enthusiasm and self-confidence in meditation really improves. So you have to enjoy your meditation. That's your challenge. If you don't enjoy meditation, if you think it's good for you, like a medicine, then when you leave retreats, all your good intentions gradually evaporate. Mostly when people leave, I'm going to keep up a sitting practice every day, and then it doesn't last for very long, and I'm hopeless. I have to go on another retreat. But you have to look. What are the causes and conditions that will enable you to maintain a practice, and what are those causes and conditions that will undermine it? I would say one of the main conditions is you enjoy it and you see the value of it. And seeing the value of it means observing in your daily life the benefits that you obtain from it. They don't have to be really spectacular spiritual attainments, but if you find that you're a little bit more calm, a little bit more clear, a little bit more awake in your daily life, you don't get caught up in things so easily, you're able to re-establish your mindfulness more quickly, more effectively, then these things will help you to see, it's a really important part of my life. But the practice itself, enjoy it. Don't do it too long, but if you enjoy it, the time will gradually increase by itself. So one way of meditating is just to consider, enjoy the in-breath, enjoy the out-breath. Make that your challenge. How can you be here present and enjoy the sensation of the in-breath? How can you enjoy the sensation of the out-breath? Because if you enjoy your meditation object, then you're not going to start thinking about the past and the future and what you're going to do when you get home, and thinking about food and thinking about family, because you're enjoying what you're doing. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, yes, it's not surprising, is it, that the mind will go out and look for something more interesting. So rather than being this state of not really enjoying what you're doing and so constantly fighting against this tendency to want to go into the past, the future, and for some kind of mental pleasure, then you say, how can I really enjoy this? And so enjoy your meditation. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And if you don't enjoy it, well then, how can you reflect on it in such a way that you do feel some enthusiasm? Again, it's a matter of looking, observing. There are so many skillful means, so many different kinds of reflection. See what works for you, what's really uplifting for you. Some of the teachings you feel kind of indifferent towards, that doesn't matter, but notice the teachings that work and that give you a sense of uplift and encouragement, and make those tools that you use to deal with the ups and downs in your practice. You're constantly educating yourself, educating the way you relate to the physical world, to the people around you. Educate the emotions gradually, reducing the power of negative emotions, developing the positive emotions, experiencing inner calm, bliss, tranquility, stability, brightness of mind, and using the bright mind to look, observe, and seeing the three characteristics. That's probably enough for the talk this evening. I'd like to offer this to you. I can talk till the cows come home.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
To the untrained mind, of course, it seems that if you're really strongly mindful, then you can't be spontaneous, because spontaneity seems to be almost automatic. Are they mutually exclusive, mindfulness and spontaneity?
No, I think the spontaneous mind is quite often conditioned by things we've done, things we've said in the past, and it's perhaps not quite. I mean, why is it that we have these kind of spontaneous reactions to things? Say it's not completely out of the blue. That if we've lived in a certain way, thought in a certain way, acted in a certain way, then we create pathways in the mind, or let's say even ruts in the mind, and the mind goes into them very easily. So I think that quite a lot of what we refer to as spontaneity is not really very spontaneous at all. But I would say that to the extent to which the mind is free of hindrances, free of the power of the unmindful forces in the mind, then the clearer, brighter, and the more likely that really creative forces will be able to express themselves. Because mindfulness just means that there's, totally present and without thoughts of self-aggrandizement, of aversion and dislike, of boredom, depression, of agitation, of doubt. So it means an absence of those things which make the mind very predictable and are ultimately lead neither to true happiness or benefit for ourselves or others. So I think if we use that word spontaneous in its really positive sense, I would say that it's the mindful mind which is spontaneous, and without mindfulness we're not really spontaneous in that sense of creative and positive that I think you mean by that word.
Because spontaneity frequently surprises, doesn't it?
Yes.
But if you've got such a good mindful mind, you should not be surprised by anything that happens. Or am I very stupid?
Well, neither. Neither are you very stupid, or is it that way? I think that I think that's one of the things that makes life so interesting, isn't it? That things happen that you didn't think would happen, and things that you find very moving that you would think, well, why is that so moving? And other things that you would think would be very upsetting, and you feel quite sort of calm about. And I think the danger is to get in this idea, I should be in a certain way, and if I'm a good person, I should be like this, and I shouldn't have that thought, or it's just the way it is. It's like this, because there are causes and conditions for it to be like this. If you look in the past and you did some really sort of stupid thing, the unskillful way of looking at it is that, oh, I'm such a bad person. And say, well, given all the causes and conditions that led up to that moment, that's what happened right then. It had to be that way because I had that much mindfulness, that much wisdom, that much greed, that much hatred, that much delusion. Given that all those things were like that, that's what happened. But there's nothing like really stable. There's this me who was that way. There's this me who's intelligent, this me who's stupid, There are just all these mental states and physical mental states in flux. And until you reach that level of stream entry, everything is completely unstable. I was speaking to some people the other night, and in Buddhist communities, we've had cases of senior monks who've been practicing for 20 years even, who've left the monastic order, and it's very hard to really understand, that all people have been meditating for so long, and how can that happen? And how I explain it is that is with a simile. Suppose we had a glass of water with some germs in them, which are dangerous germs, and the way to purify that water is to boil the water at 100 degrees. And say you started heating that water and it reached, say, 95 degrees, and it's just very, it looks, very hot, and you would imagine that you've reached that point. But if you let that water cool down again, you find that actually all the germs are still there. So when you see people who've been practicing for very long and they seem to have really developed, they can be at that point of 95 degrees centigrade. They're almost at that point where the germs would die, but they're not dead, they're still there. And if they relax their efforts or the heat goes down, then all the germs, will just flourish as they were. So this is why, whether for monks, or nuns, lay people, the point is to realize this state of what we call stream entry, and that's when the powerful, positive, noble forces become stabilized and cannot degenerate anymore, and the worst kinds of negative forces cannot arise anymore in the mind. It's a cut-off point. So in the traditional way of speaking, we say someone who reaches that point has the confidence they can never again be born in a hell realm, or as an animal, or in a ghostly realm. But if that kind of way of talking is more difficult for you, in a basic sense, you can be absolutely sure that the grosser kinds of greed, hatred, and delusion cannot ever take over and overwhelm the mind ever again. So and that's, like you've reached 100 degrees, the water's boiling and all these nasty germs have all died.
What is the minimum level of concentration that one would need to attain that level?
Well, the more still and the more mindful you can be, the better, basically. It's not a hard and fast thing, but I would say that let's bring on the practical level. If you're developing mindfulness of an object, if the mind wanders, you bring it back. The mind wanders, you bring it back. If your mind has reached a level of calm and tranquility, and you decide to develop the insight meditation or vipassana meditation, and after a while your mind wanders, then you don't follow that same technique of bringing it back to the reflection or the penetration. You stop, because it means your mind doesn't have enough concentration to reflect on the three characteristics. So with the mindfulness, or we call samatha practice, if you want to use, I don't really like these terms, but if you're developing mindfulness on an object, it wanders, you bring it back. But if you're reflecting, the wisdom kind of reflection, it wanders, it means stop. You go back to your breath, or you go back to Buddha. In the mindfulness meditation, alertness, clarity of mind is absolutely essential. You can get into these very subtle states of sloth and torpor. Like the gross state of sloth and torpor is just like this, but the really refined states of sloth and torpor, you're like this. Don't think someone sitting like that is not suffering from sloth and torpor. They can be, but it's a much more refined level. And it's like you come out and you sort of feel kind of nice. It's like you've been asleep, you've had a nap. but that's not a basis for liberation. So one way, if in the midst, sometimes just to use a word in every now and again, if you just become awake in your mind, just to is that sense of wakefulness and clarity, alertness there. If you're not really sure, then count the breaths for a while. If the mind is really bright and is free of that hindrance, the counting should be very easy. But if you find you feel kind of nice and kind of calm and cozy, but you can't count breaths very effectively, then you're kidding yourself. So that's quite a good test. Mm.
In today's society, how far do you think a layperson could be done with this practice? Do you see psychotherapy as having a role in a layperson's life? And the third question is, is there any suggestion methods dealing with self-consciousness?
First question, I think for all of its faults and all of its detrimental effects on consciousness, modern capitalist society does give people opportunities and that to choose one's livelihood in a way that people in the past could not do. I mean, until 50 years ago, basically, you were pretty well confined by your social class, by your parents, and so on. Unless you were very wealthy, basically you didn't have much choice of your livelihood. But now you can choose much more easily if money is not a major criterion for you. If you're willing to live quite simply, you can choose a livelihood which is compatible with Dhamma practice, and to make sure that you have not working in a way which really agitates the mind or which brings up a lot of negativity. So you're seeking to find a livelihood which is as compatible as possible with spiritual practice. Given that kind of willingness to work within parameters which are conducive, there's no reason why a layperson, man or woman, cannot realize stream entry. And there are plenty of lay Buddhists in Asia who have realized that level, and some of them actually leading quite busy lives. So there have been lay people realizing at least that level of stream entry from time of Buddha to the present day, and it's perfectly practical to establish that as a goal in lay life. The second question is about psychotherapy. Then I don't know that I'm really qualified to answer. I don't have that much knowledge about this subject, and also I think psychotherapy is just there's so many different things under the umbrella of psychotherapy, and I would say that probably some of them that I would say yes, and some that I would be doubtful of. But I think in the end can take the standard that the Buddha gave when the Buddha was asked about all the different religions and different spiritual teachings that were prevalent in the time of the Buddha, and he said, which ones, which ones are right, which ones are wrong, which ones are trustworthy, and which ones are not, and the Buddha would say, well, any teaching, any philosophy, so on, which is in concord with the Eightfold Path, is usable and is possible to make use of, and anything which contradicts the principles of the Eightfold Path is something which won't lead to any real liberation. So I think that taking that kind of criteria, certain psychotherapeutic principles and practices, if you think that they could, say, be compatible with development of right speech, for instance, or would help you to develop more wise relationship to people that you live with and so on, then why not? But I'm not really qualified about that. I've been living in Thailand for 27 years now, and I don't really have that kind of information. The third question was self-consciousness. I think the very simple and very effective means of dealing with self-consciousness is loving-kindness meditation. Loving-kindness meditation takes away fear and takes away a lot of self-consciousness. Say I do a lot of public speaking, and I've spoken to very large groups of people and never had a problem. But if I give a Dhamma talk right from the start, I'm offering dana. I consider it just like someone who wants to offer dana, offer food to the sangha. You say, well, how much can you afford? And you give as much as you can afford, and you're happy with that. And you give a Dhamma talk. It's not promoting myself. I'm just offering something that I've learnt and sharing it. And so it's an offering that I hope will be of benefit to other people. So when my mind is in that state of giving, I'm giving something, however it might be, however humble, however exalted it might be. This is what I've got to offer, and I hope that it will be of benefit to people. And just that wish that people who listen will gain some benefit from it. That for me means that all those thoughts of self-consciousness, of hopes of praise and fear of blame and what will people think of me, those things don't arise. They're completely purified by that pure wish to give whatever you've got. But when you think me and what will people think of me and do people like me, and when you start getting into that way of thinking, then it's very difficult to avoid being self-conscious, isn't it? And there are many wise reflections. Basically all we can ever know are the five khandhas. So all that I could know of you, are my five khandhas. That's to say, you as a visual object, you as the sound that comes to my ear. I have various perceptions, thoughts that may arise, but basically, I'm just experiencing my five khandhas. So that when you think someone's judging you or someone's this, actually they're just in an internal dialogue with their own five khandhas. It's not about you at all, is it? So there's various ways. Just use your ability to think and reflect and look at it. But I think that's the more kind of intellectual side. But the on the emotional side, loving kindness, I think, is a really good way of dealing with it.
Somebody who finds loving kindness for themselves or for other people very difficult, that practice is very difficult. Do you have any recommendations?
Don't you wish anything for yourself? Do you have any aspirations in your life? Obviously. Oh, sorry. Well, ask that person. Say, isn't there anything that you wish in your life that you think would make you happier than you are at the present? And then you just sort of wish those things for yourself. If you think, I'm a really grumpy, miserable, selfish person, you say, may I be free of grumpiness, may I be free of selfishness. Just find the particular things that. Yes. Start off with those things that you really recognise as things you aspire to, beautiful things that you would like to develop in your life, or things that you'd like to be free of. You say that to the person. And similarly, if there's somebody that you have real difficulty with, similarly, he's such a self-indulgent person, so cruel, so jealous and nasty. Say, may that person be free of their nastiness. May they be free of their jealousy. So, you think, wouldn't it be wonderful if that person could be less cruel, less unkind, less jealous. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So yeah, be more specific like that. Another common technique is just to take something that you can feel loving kindness for. Just say something that you just feel, oh, isn't that nice? Like a little kitten, or a little dog, or just something that's totally corny. Don't worry about it. You don't have to tell anybody else. But just a kind of feeling in your heart melts, whatever it is. It might be Bambi or Mickey Mouse. Right? And that's just your way into it. Just so you can develop that kind of feeling, and then gradually you start off with what's easy, and then gradually work to what's difficult. Is basically the principle. Yeah. Is this all right for me to go? Yeah. I'm just checking it's all right for me to go.
I've been wondering whether it's better to have one meditation object, and I can give an example of that, and whether to stick to that same object, whatever it is, all of the time, all of the meditation. I find just being with the breath, I just can't do it on its own. I find it boring. But if I put the breath with Buddha, or if I watch the breath and watch my body's reaction to the breath, then I can sustain that for much longer and much happier doing that.
Yeah, do what makes you happy. Do what you enjoy doing. Yeah, you've got to enjoy it, and don't worry, whether it's in the books or not. But can you be mindful? Can you be present? Can you sustain it? Using Buddha is a method that most of the great teachers in northeast Thailand have used. And if you're meditating for many hours a day, boredom's going to arise for sure. And in one sense, that's part of what you're learning about. You want to learn what's boredom. What's the relationship between boredom and excitement? And how much is our attitude and our desire for excitement conditioning our boredom? So that's something we're looking at in meditation. It's exposing these things. It's not like meditation is to get away from all these negative mental states, but in some way it's allowing us to look at them more clearly and just seeing the whole structure of them in our lives. But I would say that generally it's good to have one basic meditation object. Let's say mindfulness of the breathing, which would include breathing using mantra Buddha, for instance. And then you want to have auxiliary meditations to develop these over the course of time, at least 3. So as I was saying just now, your mind wanders, you bring it back, your mind wanders, you bring it back. But sometimes you can go through periods of time where the mind's just going to the same place again and again and again, and it just wants to go there. And that's when you have to develop a particular antidote. So if your mind's in a very negative space and you're just full of anger and aversion, and you bring it back and it goes again, then it's okay, it's time to leave the breath for a while and use the loving kindness meditation as an antidote for the anger. Similarly, you need to have some kind of body meditation to deal with sensual desire if it becomes very strong and becomes a real obstacle. When just bringing the mind back to the breath is not enough. So taking hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, or going through the 32 parts of the body. And if you find just one part of the body that it's really powerful, you really feel it's really ugly or unattractive, and you can take that as you make that a tool that you use to counteract the really strong sensual desire in the mind, which arises every now and again. So you have tool like particular antidotes for very strong, powerful, persistent defilements to support your basic meditation practice. And the third one, which is very good developed, is mindfulness of death. reflection on death, to bring up sense of urgency in practice, and when you get lazy and sort of reluctant to practice. This is how I teach anyway, to have your mindfulness of breathing as your main practice, but to develop some facility at least, to have these three auxiliary practices: a loving kindness practice, meditation on the physical body, particularly unattractiveness of physical body, and death meditation. So if you're practicing many hours a day, sometimes it's good just to have a bit of variation and to be able to use one of these other auxiliary techniques.
If you're with the breath,
Mm.
and then you start, then the sound of silence arises, or something else arises within the body, the sense of some energy before, wholesome energy. Is it okay to just think, oh, okay, that's arise, go with that?
It's good to decide on your strategy before you begin the meditation, not to make choices and to be considering things within the meditation itself. So if you decide before you begin to meditate, I'm going to meditate on the breath, if you're doing the sound of silence, if the sound of silence arises, then I'll concentrate on the sound of silence. But you don't want to be in the middle of a meditation and say, shall I go with that or shall I stay with this, because that's really harmful to meditation. So you just clarify at the beginning of meditation, what I'm meditating for this next 45 minutes, this next hour, what do I want to do in this time? What's my strategy? What's my goal? Yeah.
Mindful meditation, having set an alarm clock for a given time, sometimes I feel that I've come to the end, the natural feeling the end of the meditation could be longer or shorter than the time I've set. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, fine. I mean, if you've been sitting for a while and you're generally you've got a stable meditation practice, then that's fine. You don't have to follow the alarm clock. If someone was just beginning to meditate and they find that consistently, they're feeling they want to end before the time they've allotted comes up, then I would say be careful, because often it's just the kind of defilements, the Mara, which is sort of making it shorter and shorter. So that's something you know for yourself. But if you're finding it's often longer than that, as much as it's less than time, then maybe you don't need to use a clock anymore.
How would you meditate on death?
On death?
Yes, you said death meditation.
Yes.
How? I mean, what?
Well, basically, you can use a Pali phrase, Maraname Bhuisti, or use English as "I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die" as a mantra, and you can, if you wish, use your imagination. Imagine yourself lying in a coffin, dead, and people coming and paying respects, and it's a matter of you have to be careful, and if you're able to do that, if you find you're getting very afraid or depressed or something, it means you're not doing it right, or maybe it's not kind of right meditation for you to do that. But this constant recognition, this body is limited. It's not going to be around forever. We don't know how long we're going to. We're going to die for sure, but we don't know when we're going to die, and we don't know how we're going to die, and what have we developed in our spiritual life so far. So the idea is to bring up this sense of acquaintance with the truth of things, and to deal with this the sort of repression of this truth of life, but also to bring up the sense of urgency, and to spend our time more usefully and wisely than perhaps we do. So it's an auxiliary technique for most people, unless they have a real pull to it, but it's just for basic mental hygiene. It's important to remember this truth. I'm going to get old, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to die. You should think about this every day. So it just becomes, yeah, it's all right.
It's a good idea to meditate on how you'd like to die.
Well, I don't know whether I call that meditation. I mean, it's more that the meditation would be, it's more likely than not that I will not die in the way that I'd like to die. Sorry.
At the time that the Buddha was to be conceived, the Queen had a dream, white elephant touching the hip or whatever. So the story goes. I've had a lot of dreams that tend to be very transformational and certainly instructional, and when used as a contemplation, have actually really helped me to resolve past issues, and also sort of really gain some awarenesses about sometimes clarity on situations that are actually manifesting in my life. It's I can't actually recall the Buddha actually. I haven't come across any teachings yet where he's talking about where dreams fit into all this stuff. If they fit in at all.
You're right. Yeah, I can't think of them either. I think, yeah, Buddha didn't really speak about dreams very much. I mean, he spoke about auspicious dreams he had as a bodhisattva, and he interpreted them. You remember all this, the things that arose on his body. I can't remember all the details now. And but it's noticeably absent from the Theravada tradition. I think in the Tibetan tradition there's a bit more about dreams there. So, I mean, I must admit I generally see that dreaming means sleeping a bit too much. If you sort of, yeah. But, I find if you just sleep, myself, I just sleep the right amount, I hardly ever dream, very rarely.
Yet psychologists say that the dream state, the REM state, etc., and the dream state is really vital to be integrated in waking life.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll take one more question, then I have to go and say good night to my mum.
Yeah, the major role of psychotherapy is to help the individual to develop a healthy sense of self, a healthy ego. So it has become a known familiar jargon these days within Buddhist type of psychotherapy that someone has to be, an individual has to be somebody before it can be nobody. So even forgetting this psychotherapeutic point of view, but just generally speaking, what is your view about that?
I would say that what psychotherapists would or what
view about someone having to have a healthy sense of ego before encountering the spiritual life.
Yes, so what in that terminology you talk about, like a healthy sense of self in Buddhist tradition is created, is sustained by dana and sila. So generosity and precepts are what create self-esteem and general sense of well-being, and what would perhaps be called healthy sense of healthy ego, being somebody in kindness, generosity, precepts.
Well, I was thinking more you used about the cliff.
Mm.
With an unhealthy ego, that cliff could be experienced as a precipice.
Mm. Yeah, I still would stick by the Buddhist practices of sharing, giving, and precepts as creating the foundation for spiritual development. Development of mindfulness, patience, contentment, kindness, all these things will provide. I don't like to talk about ego, and I don't know what that really corresponds to in the real world of experience, or being somebody. And I prefer to use Buddhist terms, and I
probably have not phrased my question properly. What about if I say, do you ever come across individuals to whom you say, come back at another stage and whatever, you're not fit yet to practice?
Yeah, sure. And so those are the people that you teach dana and sila. So I remember some years ago visiting a Cambodian community in the States. This is sometime after Khmer Rouge, and speaking with the abbot of this monastery. This is in America, and he's a very well respected meditation teacher. And he said, I don't teach much meditation, in terms of what you're doing here, very much, because the people are just too damaged by what happened in Cambodia. So we're doing a lot of dana, people coming, doing some gardening in the monastery, offering their skills, making food for the monks, sharing, and we're putting a lot of emphasis on keeping the precepts and acting skillfully and compassionately towards each other. And so this is the Buddhist idea. You build up from there. So it's not like the sitting meditation is sort of be all and the end all. You have to have that foundation of dana and sila, really. So it's
a refreshing approach compared to the psychotherapeutic one.
There are yes, in Thailand. I mean, I gave a retreat for psychiatrists last year, and in Buddhist countries, the psychiatrists are a lot more open to this kind of idea, because they themselves are like Buddhists in their private lives, and encourage people to do things for other people, and just find that kind of basic joy in life of doing something good and for others that you don't expect any reward for, and sharing. Yeah, I think sometimes, as I say, I feel it's a very reductionist idea about Buddhism. Often, it's all about meditation, but it's cultivation, it's education. So yeah, sometimes that going inwards is, people are not ready for that going inwards and looking very clearly at what's inside. They have to have that support from the basics. So yeah, a teacher would see. Yeah, encourage people, just come along to the monastery, do a bit of gardening, put some flowers on the altar, do something, and spend some time in the kitchen, have a chat, So that's what I call Buddhist psychotherapy. Yeah.